What if the joke that made the room laugh was the trigger for a secret no one was supposed to uncover? A privileged white woman humiliated an elderly black waiter by demanding he entertain her dinner party, never suspecting she was about to witness the performance of a lifetime from a former Carnegie Hall virtuoso. When Deschamps' fingers unleashed Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata with devastating precision, the room's racist assumption shattered as violently as the silence that followed. The viral video didn't just expose one woman's cruelty. It revealed how society discards genius based on the color of a uniform. If you love interesting stories like this that expose the truth, please give this video a thumbs up and tell us in the comments section where in the world you are watching this video, and also do well to smash that subscribe button. The grand ballroom at the Beverly Hills Country Club buzzed with rich people's chatter. Crystal glasses clinked under golden chandeliers. Politicians mixed with tech moguls. Old Hollywood money sat next to new cryptocurrency wealth. The charity auction was raising funds for the arts, but nobody really cared about the cause. They were here to be seen. Deschamps Freeman moved through the crowd like a ghost. At 67, he perfected the art of being invisible. He carried champagne glasses on silver trays, cleaned up spills, and smiled when people needed him. After 33 years of catering, he knew his place. Tonight felt different, though. Maybe it was the way the light hit the baby grand piano in the corner. Or maybe it was just the weight of all those years catching up to him. He'd been carrying trays so long. He'd almost forgotten what it felt like to create something beautiful. Victoria Sterling sat at the center table like a queen on her throne. Diamonds sparkled on her neck, each one worth more than Deschamps' annual salary. She was the kind of woman who thought the world revolved around her checkbook. Twice divorced, board member of half a dozen charities, she collected causes like she collected jewelry, for show. She'd been drinking champagne all evening, getting louder with each glass. "You know what?" Victoria called out, pointing at Deschamps with a manicured finger. "I bet you can play that piano over there. Why don't you give us a little show?" The room chuckled, not because it was funny, but because Victoria was the one talking. Someone pulled out their phone, already thinking about the Instagram story they'd post later. Deschamps stopped moving. He looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time all night, in her eyes, he saw what he'd seen 1,000 times before. The casual cruelty of someone who'd never been told no. "Go ahead," she said, waving her wine glass. "Set the mood for us. I'm sure you know something." Deschamps didn't say a word. He just placed his tray down on the nearest table with careful precision, the way he'd done everything in his life since he was 17, with quiet dignity. The walk to the piano felt like crossing a battlefield. Every step echoed in the suddenly quiet room. People turned in their chairs, conversations dying mid-sentence. He'd walked this walk before 40 years ago, across stages in New York and Philadelphia and Boston. Back then, he wore tailored suits and felt the weight of possibility on his shoulders. Now he wore a server's uniform and felt the weight of a lifetime's worth of compromises. The piano bench was exactly the right height. His hands found their position above the keys without thinking. For a moment, he just sat there, his fingers hovering over the ivory like a prayer waiting to be spoken. Deschamps closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his lids, he saw Keisha's face the day she died. He saw Marcus graduating college. He saw all the stages he'd never played on, all the music he'd never shared, all the dreams he'd carefully folded away like old letters. Then he began to play. The first notes were soft, almost too soft to hear over the air conditioning, but they landed like thunder in the silence. This wasn't party music. This was Moonlight Sonata, played like a man's life depended on it. People stopped eating. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Victoria sat up straighter, her smirk fading fast. Deschamps' hands moved like they were dancing with old memories. He didn't look at the keys. He didn't need to. The music poured out of him like water from a broken dam. It was beautiful. It was heartbreaking. It was real. The melody wrapped around the room like silk, touching every corner, every heart, every conscience. This wasn't just playing. This was storytelling. Each note carried weight, carried history, carried pain and joy and everything in between. By the time he reached the middle part, where the melody turns inward and whispers its secrets, no one was breathing. Even Victoria's face changed. The arrogance melted away like ice in sunlight, replaced by something she'd never felt before: shame. Deshawn played like he was 17 again, like the world was listening, like it mattered. When the final note faded into silence, the quiet that followed was so complete it felt sacred. What nobody knew was that Deshawn Freeman wasn't just a waiter. He was a ghost of greatness. 40 years ago, he was a boy from Detroit's East Side who could make pianos sing. His grandmother, Ruby Freeman, worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. But she always found time to listen to him play on the old upright piano in their tiny apartment. "You got magic in those hands, baby," she would whisper. "Don't let nobody tell you different." Deshawn could hear a song once and play it back perfectly. By 12, he was writing his own pieces. His music teacher helped him audition for Juilliard. The day the acceptance letter arrived, Ruby cried for an hour. "We did it, baby. We really did it." At Juilliard, Deshawn was one of only 3 black students in his class. He worked twice as hard as everyone else, practiced until his fingers bled. By his senior year, he was winning competitions, getting reviewed in music magazines. At 23, he played Carnegie Hall for a young composer showcase. The New York Times called him a rising star with fingers that could make angels weep. Record labels started calling. But life had other plans. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October. His sister Keisha had collapsed at work. She was a nurse at Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit. Cancer. Aggressive. 6 months to live. She had a son, little Marcus, barely 5 years old. Their father had left when Marcus was born. Their mother had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. There was no one else. So Deshawn came home to Detroit. He told himself it was just for a while. Just until she got better. She never got better. Hospital bills ate his savings like fire through paper. Dreams don't pay for chemotherapy. So he picked up a serving tray and put down his sheet music. 1 month became 1 year. 1 year became 33. He raised Marcus like his own son. Went to every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every graduation. Put him through college and graduate school. Never complained. Never looked back. But he never forgot the music. Late at night, when Marcus was asleep, Deshawn would sit at the old piano and play softly. He'd play the pieces he'd written at Juilliard, the ones that were supposed to change the world. He'd play them for an audience of one, himself, and remember who he used to be. When the last note faded, the room held its breath. Then came the applause. Not the polite clapping of rich people at charity events, but something deeper, something real, something that comes from the soul. People stood up slowly, like they were in church. Tears streamed down faces. A woman in a $1,000 dress wiped her eyes with a cocktail napkin. Victoria Sterling sat frozen, her wine glass halfway to her lips. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. In a way, she had. Deshawn stood up, adjusted his black service jacket, and walked back to his tray. Just another night at work. Except it wasn't, and everyone knew it. Within minutes, phones were out. Videos were being uploaded. By the time Deshawn clocked out and took the bus home, the video had been shared thousands of times. People were asking questions, digging into his past, trying to understand how someone with that much talent ended up serving champagne at charity galas. The next morning, Marcus called, his voice shaking with excitement. "Dad, you need to see this. You're everywhere. The video. It's gone viral. People are calling you a genius. They want to know your story." Deshaun sat at his kitchen table, drinking coffee from the same mug he'd used for 10 years. "I played one song, Marcus." "You played one song," Marcus replied. "But it changed everything." 3 days later, Victoria Sterling knocked on Deshaun's door. She wasn't wearing diamonds or designer clothes, just jeans and a simple navy coat. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, no makeup, no jewelry. She looked tired, older, vulnerable. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice shaking. "A real one." Deshaun let her in. His small apartment was nothing fancy. Worn furniture, family photos in simple frames, books stacked on every surface. But it was clean, organized, loved. The old piano sat by the window, sheet music scattered across the top. "I was wrong," Victoria continued. "I treated you like furniture. Like you didn't matter. Like you were just there for my entertainment." She sat down heavily on his couch. "I've been thinking about that night. About what you played. You weren't performing for us. You were sharing something sacred, and I almost ruined it." Deshaun sat across from her. "You didn't have to know my story," he said quietly. "You just had to treat me like a human being. I know that now." Victoria's voice cracked. "I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who tell me what I want to hear. But that night I felt small. Really small." She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. For what I said, for how I said it, for assuming you were less than you are." Deshaun was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and walked to the piano. He sat down and played. Not Debussy this time, but something gentler. A melody he'd written years ago, full of pain and hope and forgiveness. When he finished, Victoria wiped her eyes. "If you ever decide to play again, really play. I'll be there. Not as a donor writing a check, just as someone who wants to listen." Deshaun looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "I think I'd like that." 2 weeks later, the Martin Luther King Jr. Community Center in Detroit was packed. Every folding chair was taken. People stood along the walls, sat on the floor, crowded in the doorway. A simple flyer on the door read, "Piano Night with Deshaun Freeman. Free. Everyone welcome." The crowd was unlike anything the community center had ever seen. Teenagers sat next to elderly neighbors. College students shared space with working mothers. Former Juilliard classmates had driven in from New York. People who'd seen the video came from 3 states away. Deshaun wore his best suit. The one he'd worn to Keisha's funeral. The one he'd worn to Marcus's college graduation. The same suit he'd worn to his Carnegie Hall debut 40 years ago. Marcus stood by the door, checking people in, proud as any son could be. "That's my dad," he kept saying to anyone who would listen. "That's my dad." Victoria sat in the 3rd row. No makeup, no jewelry, just a simple black dress. She'd brought her teenage daughter, Emma, who'd been skeptical about spending her Saturday night at a community center. But something about the energy in the room made her sit up and pay attention. The piano was borrowed from the local high school. Not as grand as the one at the country club, but well-maintained, in tune, ready to sing. Deshaun didn't make a speech. He didn't introduce himself. He just sat down and began to play. First came Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the piece that had made him famous at 17, the piece that had gotten him into Juilliard. But tonight, he played it different. Slower, deeper, like a man who'd lived long enough to understand what the music really meant. The room was silent except for the sound of the piano and the occasional catch in someone's throat. Children sat still in their parents' laps. Teenagers forgot about their phones. Old folks closed their eyes and remembered their own dreams. Then came one of his own pieces. Something he'd written in college but never shared with the world. A melody that captured the sound of Detroit in the 70s, the rhythm of hope and struggle. The music that lived in the spaces between heartbreak and healing. When he finished, the silence stretched for what felt like forever. Then came the applause. Not thunderous, but deep, sustained, grateful. People stood slowly, like they were in church, like they just witnessed something sacred. Victoria's daughter leaned over and whispered, "Mom, that was incredible. How did you know about this?" Victoria smiled through her tears. "I almost didn't." The community center started hosting weekly piano nights. Deshawn didn't become famous in the traditional sense. No record deals, no world tours, no magazine covers. But he became something better. He became seen. He became heard. He became home. Children came to learn. Adults came to remember. Everyone came to listen to the man who'd almost been forgotten, who'd been hiding in plain sight for 33 years. Someone, Deshawn suspected it was Victoria, though she never admitted it, donated a beautiful new piano to the community center. A Steinway Baby Grand, perfectly tuned, with a small brass plaque that read simply, "For the music that lives in all of us." On Saturday afternoons, Deshawn taught anyone who wanted to learn. Not formal lessons with rigid scales and theory, just sharing what he knew. The joy of music, the power of expression, the importance of never giving up on the things that make you feel alive. He taught 8-year-old Jasmine, who reminded him of himself at that age. He taught Michael, a teenager who'd been getting into trouble until he found something better to do with his hands. He taught Mrs. Henderson, who was 75 and had always wanted to learn piano but thought she was too old. "It's never too late," Deshawn would tell them. "Music doesn't care how old you are. It only cares that you're willing to listen." Victoria came every week, sometimes bringing friends, sometimes coming alone. She never made a big show of it. She just sat in the back and listened, learning something new about herself each time. One evening, after everyone had gone home, Victoria found Deshawn still at the piano, playing softly in the empty room. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened?" she asked quietly. "If things had been different?" Deshawn looked up from the keys. "Every day for the first 10 years. Then I realized I was missing what I did have by mourning what I'd lost." "Do you regret it?" "The choice you made. I regret that I had to make it. But I don't regret the choice itself. Marcus needed me. Keisha needed me. They were my family. And now I get to do both. I get to be a father and a musician. I get to serve my community and share my gift. Maybe this is what I was meant to do all along." Victoria sat down on the bench beside him. "Play something for me. Something you've never played for anyone else." Deshawn smiled and placed his fingers on the keys. The melody that emerged was something he'd been working on for weeks. A piece about second chances, about the music that lives in the spaces between heartbreak and healing, about the beauty that comes from lives fully lived. When he finished, Victoria was crying. "That was perfect," she whispered. "It's not finished yet," Deshawn said. "But it's getting there." Outside, Detroit hummed with its usual rhythm. Inside the community center, an old piano held the echo of music that had been waiting 40 years to be heard. Deshawn Freeman had found his way back to the stage. It wasn't Carnegie Hall, but it was something better. It was home. It was family. It was the sound of dreams that refuse to die, no matter how long they have to wait. Deshawn Freeman never got his second chance at fame, but he got something better. The chance to touch lives, one note at a time, to show the world that it's never too late to be heard, that dreams don't die, they just wait. In a world that judges by appearance, that assumes and dismisses and forgets, Deshawn proved something powerful. Everyone has a song inside them. Sometimes it just takes the right moment, and the right person listening, to let it out. The waiter became a teacher. The ghost became a guide. And the music? The music lived on. Sometimes the most beautiful melodies come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the people we overlook are the ones with the most to offer. And sometimes, all it takes is one song to change everything.